Hi. Today we're talking about thesis sentences, or as they're sometimes called, thesis statements. The reason we sometimes call them thesis statements specifically is to remind you that your thesis is not a question. You may start out with a research question, but your thesis of your essay will actually be answering that question. Remember that your thesis sentence should tell your reader what your essay is about. It should say what the major idea is or the theme that you're writing about. And if you're making an argument, it would be your main argument. It's basically a summary of your entire essay in one sentence. You need to make sure when you're writing a thesis that it has your clearly defined statement about a certain subject. You need to have one main idea. You need to make sure that what you're saying is worthwhile, i.e. it's not something that everybody already believes, and that it's limited to fit the assignment. Make sure that you have a thesis that is broad enough that your entire essay applies to your thesis, but is not so broad that your entire essay can't apply to the thesis. Your thesis sentence will be recognizable as the main idea of your essay, and in most cases will be at the end of the first paragraph. However, keep in mind when we get to our Rogerian argument, we will explore a delayed thesis argument, but it's the only one we'll be writing this semester. Here are some common errors that some people make with their thesis sentences. Try not to make an announcement. You don't want to say, I'm going to write about this, or I'm going to argue that. You just want to go ahead and say it. Make sure that you take out statements like I think or in my opinion. We know that you're writing from a certain point of view, so we want to make sure that you're not weakening your statement by portraying it as one of many possible valid opinions. You want to make sure that people know you think that is the correct view. Again, you want to make sure it is not too broad, so your entire essay can cover it, and not too narrow, so it covers your entire essay. You will not use a question, you will need to use a claim. And of course, a personal opinion would lead to a pseudo-argument. It would not be arguable. Lastly, remember that your thesis needs to actually be something that someone could disagree with. You don't need to convince people of things that they already agree with. So you don't want to try to argue that, say, slavery would be immoral, or that we should punish murderers, because we already agree with those things and you don't need to convince other people of such. So we're going to talk about three different kinds of thesis sentences. We're going to use the first kind for our informative essay, and we'll be using the third kind for our research paper. So first we're looking at an informative thesis. Well, what is that? We have information that we're giving to someone. This is good if you are asked for short informational writing. So maybe on an essay question, if the question asks you to explain some concept or give some information, you would use an informative thesis. My example that I'm using here is factors that influence college completion include a student's socioeconomic status, family situation, and whether he or she is required to take developmental courses. Notice that I'm just giving information. I'm listing three factors that influence this outcome. I am not saying that any of these are good or bad, or that college completion is positive or negative, and I'm not saying that anything should be done. I'm just providing information. One step up from that is a mildly argumentative thesis. When you're doing a mildly argumentative thesis, you're stating a fact and expressing an opinion, usually a value judgment or an interpretation. This is a good thing to do if you're organizing a report. So if you have an essay question that asks you to not just provide some information, but maybe choose what is the most important piece of information, or what it means, that would call for analysis. So here's my example mildly argumentative thesis. The troubling college completion rates for certain demographic groups demonstrate that opportunity in America is not particularly equal. Notice how now I'm not just mentioning college completion rates, I'm mentioning that they are troubling, and I'm pointing to the meaning of my findings. So I've found some certain situations lead to a lack of college completion, and I believe that is tied to our inequality of opportunity. Lastly, I have a strongly argumentative thesis. This is where I'm not only stating a fact, but I'm also asking for a solution. This would be good if papers require information, analysis, and your own point of view. In this case, this is for a proposal argument. If you were writing an essay question, they would ask what action, so what action should be taken. My sample is, colleges must provide extra support for first and family college students to improve retention rates. Now I have an action tied into my claim. I am saying that retention rates are low, that they need to be higher, and here's what we should do to make that happen. Here are my 3 thesis sentences all on one slide. In my informative thesis, I provide information. I'll just be explaining what these different situations are and how they tie into college completion. If I were writing a mildly argumentative essay, I would provide information and comment on it. I would still have to discuss these 3 situations and how they're tied to college completion, but I'll also have to indicate why I think that means that opportunity in America is not equal. If I were writing this strongly argumentative thesis, I would be providing information, commenting on it, and providing a call to action. Notice that in that essay, I would have to list the factors that influence college completion, explain what they are, what their relationship to college completion is. I would have to prove that they are not good, they are troubling and need to be fixed, and then I would have to provide not just my suggestion for how to fix them, but I would also have to include an explanation that would prove that my action I suggest would in fact have the effect I expect on the problem. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to write down 3 versions of your thesis statement. One of them should be explanatory, just information. One should be mildly argumentative, information and interpretation or value judgment. And one should be strongly argumentative, it should call for an action. Explain how you altered the thesis statement. Identify words that you've changed. Maybe you've strengthened an adjective, added an adverb, for example, altered the sentence structure, or added some content. You may have added some phrases or some clauses. Remember that your explanatory thesis should be your actual thesis for this paper. So if you find yourself adding things that are associated with mildly or strongly argumentative thesis sentences, like value judgments, interpretations, or calls to action, you'll need to take those out to make your thesis sentence truly explanatory. Please submit your thesis sentence activity to the Dropbox on eCampus when you complete it. Note on this last slide, I have an example of that exercise using my 3 thesis sentences. I have my informative thesis, my mildly argumentative thesis, and my strongly argumentative thesis, and I've also included what I changed in each statement to make it that kind of thesis.